How strong is Sonic the Hedgehog? There are a lot of videos on YouTube asking this question, or similar ones, talking about how Sonic or Satoro Gojo or Goku would fare against villains from another franchise. The appeal of these types of videos is obvious, and it's no wonder that a community would spawn around this type of discussion. Enter power scaling, the practice of using calculations, feats, and in-universe statements to try and determine the power level of a certain character. To be perfectly honest, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with power scaling, but that's neither here nor there. There's a pretty specific reason I wanted to make this video, and it has to do with an experience I had with this franchise. Specifically, a fight in issue 54 of the comics. These are canon to the games as of Frontiers, for the record, so this is an important detail. In this issue, a villain by the name of Surge is fighting Sonic and Tails. Surge is essentially a superpowered cyborg built to rival Sonic in terms of power, being comparably fast to him and having lightning powers. She also has a device called the Dynamo Cage, which allows her to absorb and manipulate energy around her. This allows her to steal several of Whisper's Wisp friends, using them to become even more powerful against their will. Basically, the point here is that Surge is very strong and a huge problem. Easily more powerful than Sonic and Tails can handle in a straightforward fight at the moment. Of course, this isn't ultimately anything our heroes can't handle. Tails eventually devises a plan to stop Surge. After Sonic distracts her for some time, Tails signals to Sonic to follow him into the basement of a nearby shop. Surge gives chase and ends up tripping on some nuts and bolts spilled on the ground. This wasn't like a tactic or anything, she just kinda fucked up here. Then as she tries to get up, Sonic shoves a bucket on her head to blind her. After being humiliated, Surge is even more pissed and chases Sonic down to the basement. Once there, Tails manages to blindside Surge and attaches her to a bunch of electronics via some jumper cables. This rather painfully manages to drain Surge of all electricity, effectively knocking her out. Now, later on in this arc, Surge fights Sonic and Metal Sonic at the same time, effectively fighting both of them at once to a draw. This fight was honestly really cool, and it made me curious just how strong Surge was. So I went ahead and looked up just how strong Surge was on the Versus Battle Wiki, and I want you to go ahead and guess just how powerful Surge is. Generally, characters are ranked by the biggest possible thing they can destroy, so where do you think Surge lands? Maybe like building level, city level? Well, according to the Versus Battle Wiki, Surge is ranked at tier 2C, which places her at low multiverse level. I want you to really think about that for a second. This character was defeated by a bucket and a pair of jumper cables, and she is apparently capable of destroying not only the entire planet, but multiple entire planes of reality. When you see something like this, it's hard not to do a double take. After reading this and going through some pretty serious whiplash, I started asking some questions, like, what would make someone write something that was this clearly ridiculous? Were they just wrong? Was there something I was missing? The more time I spent looking into it and thinking about the power level of the general Sonic cast, the more I came to realize something. The power scaling in the Sonic universe is a fucking mess. This statement, as bizarre as it is, isn't necessarily wrong. I don't agree with it. I think the logic used to arrive at this statement is a bit flawed, but the answer to our initial question would still be really surprising. Surge is way stronger than this fight alone would imply if you take into account everything that is currently canon. So today, I want to go on a bit of a journey with you. First, we're going to establish just how strong Surge is as a character, mostly through seeing how strong Sonic is, and I'll explain why that's how we need to approach it in a second. And then after that, we're going to take a look at various other inconsistencies that arrive from this knowledge. Finally, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about why these inconsistencies are there in the first place. I hope you're still with me because this is going to be a bit of a long ride. To answer the initial question of how strong Surge is, we have a few tools up our sleeves. The gold standard in power scaling circles is what are called feats. Basically, it's taking the most impressive things they've ever been shown to do in canon and trying to calculate using real-world physics how strong that would make them. This is good for giving you an idea of what a character is capable of, but it isn't perfect. characters don't always show off their powers at maximum capacity. It's very possible that something they do is only using a fraction of their strength or something like that. Not to mention that sometimes a character can do something really powerful but not have any calculable feats to help back that up. Surge is one such character. While Surge is shown doing some stuff that's pretty impressive, none of it is really something we can use to get any raw numbers. The best feat we have for Surge's attack potency is in issue 75 of IDW, where she lets off a massive electrical attack. Unfortunately, we don't see exactly how large this lightning attack is or what it does to the surrounding area, though the ship they're on does seem to be largely unaffected, so I'm not sure how useful this would even be if we were going to try and calculate the amount of energy involved here. Not to mention, this is Surge without the dynamo cage, which we know makes her more powerful, so if we want to calculate how strong she was back in issue 54 through 56, this wouldn't help us at all. Speed feats are also really difficult to get anything useful out of in a comic book format without direct statements from the characters, as we don't have the time variable we need to calculate speed. We can do better in terms of durability, as we do get to see Surge surviving getting smashed by this giant Bandit spike ball, but calcing this wouldn't even get close to what her durability would hit with our next form of power scaling. The next method of power scaling that we need to investigate is what I call character scaling, essentially scaling one character to another character's feats based on the fact that they fought them in lore. This is a lot sketchier, as there are other variables that come into play in fights that can mess with these calculations. Like, if I beat Mike Tyson in a fight because I had a steel pipe and he didn't, that doesn't mean I'm stronger than Mike Tyson. However, this can be a useful tool for figuring out a character's general strength, emphasis on the term general. When we're talking about fictional characters, the gap in strength can be several orders of magnitude. When you have characters that are hundreds to thousands to millions of times stronger than the other, you could say that a character holding their own against one another does imply that they're around the same level of power, even if that power is expressed in a different way from character to character. If we use character scaling, Surge suddenly starts to look way more impressive. The previously mentioned fight against Metal Sonic and Sonic, where she effectively ties in a 1v2, would make her one of the strongest characters in the franchise if you scaled her to significantly stronger than the pair and being on par with both of them at once. Of course, that's ignoring a few very important details. At the time, not only did Surge have the dynamo cage, which allowed her to control and absorb energy in the surrounding area, but she had also stolen 6 wisps and sucked up most of the electricity left in the base, so this is one of the most souped up versions of a Sonic character that could exist outside of a straight up super form. Now, the electricity thing is a stated weakness of Surge. She can only carry so much electricity at a time and has to recharge if she runs out. You can probably assume that her getting all of the electricity is more just her being at peak performance during the fight rather than a different power-up. However, the wisps in Dynamo Cage are definitely power boosts that she usually doesn't have. Both give her access to abilities that she does not usually have access to, and seem to give her basic abilities a boost as well. This fight is the most impressive thing that Surge has done, but it relies on a lot of boosts of unknown quality. The most this feat can give us is placing Surge somewhere close to Sonic and Metal Sonic's power level, a statement that's backed up by several other scenes where Surge takes down Metal Sonic with the help of Kid, or goes toe-to-toe with Sonic and narrowly loses the engagement. This means that we can at least comfortably place Surge as in the same league as Sonic, something that other characters in the comic agree with. So, the easiest way to try and pin down Surge's place on this scale would be to figure out how strong Sonic is. Again, we won't be able to be precise with almost any of these statements, as character scaling isn't precise enough to do something like that, but we can at least know that some of her stats are in the same ballpark as Sonic's. That means the next question we have to ask is, how strong is Sonic? Well, this is where things start to get really wacky. Let's start with an absolute baseline and go upwards. Things that we all know Sonic is capable of and that he's consistently shown as being able to do. For one, we know Sonic is fast. He's able to quickly accelerate to at least the speed of sound, as in basically any boost game activating boost will cause a particle effect that looks a lot like a sonic boom. You could argue against this by saying it's only an aesthetic thing or for gameplay, but arguing that Sonic isn't at least Mach 1 is kind of silly since we have tons of evidence for him being much faster than that. Take a look at this comic page where he runs from Winterberg all the way to Restoration HQ. This isn't directly calculable, at least not without a lot of assumptions, but we at least see visible sonic booms, so we know he's breaking the sound barrier here. If we are willing to make some assumptions, we can at least get some numbers out of this. The top panel also shows him having disappeared from sight, while the coffee he was drinking earlier and his blanket are still falling. It's barely even moved too, so this is likely only a split second after he left, maybe around 100th of a second. If we say the distance Sonic ran here is around 100 yards or the length of a football field, which seems about right from eyeballing it, then that means Sonic just ran 20,454 miles per hour, which is about 26.5 times the speed of sound. Now, this is a very rough calc. If we say that this took 1/10 of a second as opposed to 100th, then his speed is cut down all the way to only 2.6 times the speed of sound. There are ways you could try and argue against this, and I am making up that time variable at some level, but it'd be very difficult to interpret this panel in a way that doesn't place Sonic at least Mach 1. Any reasonable numbers you plug into this formula will probably put Sonic at least faster than sound, if not several times faster. And considering this is on top of all of the other clear evidence we have of Sonic breaking the sound barrier on this page and in the games, he's clearly at least that fast. As for durability, in Sonic Frontiers, we see Sonic get his shit kicked in by Giganto, getting thrown through several pillars of stone and surviving. He's clearly hurt, but he's not dead and doesn't even seem to be badly injured because he goes to find the Chaos Emeralds immediately afterward. All this really does is convince Sonic that fighting the Titan head-on would be a bad idea. Considering that this is the most recent game Sonic has been in that's canon, and the point of these cutscenes is to show how strong the Titans are, we can pretty easily assume that this is the level of attack you need to actually hurt Sonic. I'm not going to try and actually calc this because I don't want to, and also because to get the high end of the calc, you would need to know just how strong Giganto actually is, which I don't. But I think you could argue this attack is anywhere from small to large building level at the low end. Another feat we can use is Sonic and Amy destroying this giant robot Eggman is in with a combination attack. While Amy does help Sonic here, so we can't say this is all him in terms of attack potency, Sonic lives this and seems pretty much fine, and all that force had to go into him since Amy is smacking him with her hammer. Considering just how large this robot is, these two feats together I think comfortably put Sonic's durability at least a large building level, if not higher. The final stat I'm going to look at is attack potency, which is how much damage a character can do with their attacks, and Sonic has been shown destroying some pretty impressive stuff. Obviously, he can tear through metal robots without much issue, but we care more about the high end of things he can destroy. Using the big robot from before is tempting, but Amy helped there, so it's not that useful, honestly. One of the easier attack potency feats for Sonic would be beating Perfect Chaos in Sonic Generations. As far as we know, this isn't a weaker copy of Perfect Chaos, this just is Perfect Chaos brought to the white space by time shenanigans. And Perfect Chaos is extremely powerful, capable of destroying a small to large town on its own in a matter of seconds, as well as blowing up the entire egg carrier with just one attack. Perfect Chaos is also described as the god of destruction in the game, and I think most people would put his power level at a lot higher here, but I want to try and keep to low balls for this video. In Generations, Sonic defeats Perfect Chaos in his base form, so his attack potency has to at least be high enough to pull that off. It's tempting to say that this puts Sonic's attack potency at large city level or something, but you could argue he's using Chaos's nature as a being of water as a sort of weak point, so this is more of a hacks feat. The lowest I could see Sonic's attack potency being after this feat is large building level, but I could honestly see someone going a lot higher. This is, I think, the lowest possible stat spread we can give Sonic in his base form. Mach 2 at least in speed and large building level for durability and attack potency. This isn't to say that this is how strong Sonic is, but portraying Sonic as any weaker than this is just a mistake in my mind. However, these are all low balls. If you've been around the Powerscaling community or Sonic community for a while, you'll know that there are some feats that place Sonic way above this level of power. Starting with Sonic's speed, there are some calculations that put Sonic's max speed at some insane values. One of the most famous and easy to explain calcs for Sonic's speed comes from Sonic Unleashed. You see, this game has a speed meter telling you how fast Sonic is going at any time. One of Sonic's moves is called the light speed dash, which requires a trail of rings for Sonic to follow in order for him to use. It's heavily implied in multiple places that Sonic is actually going light speed when he uses the light speed dash, though there is at least some room to debate that. However, the important thing here is the speed meter. When using the light speed dash, your speed meter rests at a cool 390. However, Sonic can actually go a lot faster than that. The max speed that Sonic can go in this game is 3,519. Doing some simple math, we can figure out that one speed is equal to 1,719,529 miles per hour, placing Sonic's max speed at 6,051,022,551 miles per hour, or about 9 times the speed of light. There are some counter arguments to this. This is using gameplay as a basis for lore, and there do have to be some exceptions made for gameplay in order for the games to remain playable. If you were to scale Sonic's speed based on his movement in-game, the number you'd get would be far lower. Though, at the same time, times that we know Sonic is supposed to be at least breaking the sound barrier, he probably wouldn't actually be going that fast if you calc the speed based on his in-game movement. Basically, using Sonic's in-game movements to try and calculate his top speed is really hard and gets weird fast. There's also the possibility that light speed dash is just a fancy name and that Sonic doesn't actually go light speed while using it. Game manuals do say that the light speed dash is actually light speed, and the animation of Sonic while he does the light speed dash shows him kind of just appearing at each ring like he's going too fast to be perceived, so the argument for this move actually being light speed is pretty strong, I think. This would pretty easily put Sonic at 9 times faster than light, if you think that taking in-game info at face value is fair. If you don't want to take that feat at face value, there's also what he does in Sonic Forces, which is kind of weird. In Forces, Sonic gets stuck in null space, a pocket dimension cut off from the outside world, and he escapes it by running really, really fast. Honestly, I'm not sure how we're even supposed to interpret this one. Apparently, Sonic can run fast enough to bend space-time and tear a wormhole into a different dimension or something. This is, for my money, the most stupid thing Sonic's speed has done in canon, and making heads or tails of it kind of requires putting Sonic's speed at some relativistic levels at least. I mean, if we're gonna have something going so fast that it starts to fuck with the laws of physics, I think it's gonna have to at least be going faster than light, because that's when physics starts to break down a little bit. For what it's worth, Surge does also claim to be light speed in the comics, and Sonic keeps up with her, so if you want to take that literally, that could be support for this theory, but that's pretty iffy if you ask me. There's also terminal velocity from Sonic Colors, where Sonic outruns a black hole that people use to claim that Sonic is at least as fast as light, but I don't quite buy this one. This is a massive hyper-go-on energy in universe, not an actual black hole, even if it behaves similarly to one. On top of that, Sonic never actually goes past the event horizon, which is where light isn't fast enough to escape a black hole anymore. However, I think the null space speed is enough that we either have to call it a weird outlier or make up fanfiction for why Sonic could escape it, or just accept that Sonic is so fast that he can bend the laws of reality. This isn't an outlier though, as in Generations, his speed allows him to return white space to normal. This is described as a feat of his speed specifically, meaning that this is another instance of Sonic's speed itself having reality-altering properties. Once is an outlier, but being a major plot point in 2 separate games seems to imply that Sonic's speed is actually at some truly absurd levels. This could be used to put Sonic's base speed at massively faster than light, or even going to its own tier of incalculable according to some power scalers, which I don't buy, but honestly, how the fuck else are you supposed to interpret this? Now, as far as attack potency and whatnot goes, we don't have a lot of great examples of base Sonic's pure destructive potential. Super Sonic we have some good stuff for, but we'll get back to that. There are a lot of ways you could try and nail down the top end of how strong Sonic is in terms of attack power, but I think the best, least arguable example we get is from Sonic Battle. Massive spoilers for this game, but at the end of the game, you have to fight Emerald, the sort of main character, after he loses control of his programming and almost destroys the Earth. During this fight, Sonic destroys Emerald, killing him, showing that he is at least relatively more powerful than Ultimate Emerald, the form Emerald reaches in this fight. So, how powerful is Ultimate Emerald? Well, this is the form that Emerald reaches after absorbing all 7 Chaos Emeralds, some energy from the final Egg Blaster, Eggman's ultimate weapon, and training with others to improve his fighting capabilities. To put this into context, you need to know what Emerald is. He's a Gizoid, an ancient fighting robot built to continuously get stronger and destroy everything around him. Apparently, the Gizoids are so dangerous, they destroyed the 4th Great Civilization in a rampage, showing that they have incredible destructive potential. The Chaos Emeralds are obviously insanely powerful, the most powerful MacGuffins in Sonic, capable of literally ripping the planet apart in Unleashed, so absorbing all of their energy would easily put Emerald on the scale of something like Supersonic Gaia or some of the other stupidly strong things in Sonic canon. And Sonic defeats Emerald in his base form. Now, I want to get ahead of some of the crazier claims out there. I know there are some people who say that Ultimate Emerald is like galaxy level because Eggman's final Egg Blaster destroys a star cluster when it fires and Emerald absorbs it, so people assume this means that Emerald himself could do that. But that kind of just doesn't happen. Like, Emerald gains control of the final Egg Blaster and it is said to absorb some of its power, but like, they're still fighting on the final Egg Blaster in this last cutscene. Emerald is trying to fire the final Egg Blaster at Earth. He clearly doesn't just absorb it the same way that like Perfect Cell absorbs 17 and 18. The final Egg Blaster still exists. Honestly, I think we can only really scale Emerald to the 7 Chaos Emeralds, which is already way more than enough. The Chaos Emeralds are easily planet level, probably at least star level just by themselves. The Eclipse Cannon is said to be able to destroy stars, and we literally see the Chaos Emeralds rip the planet apart in Unleashed. Remember that Emerald may have destroyed the 4th Great Civilization without absorbing any of the Chaos Emeralds for all we know. It's never stated or even implied that the Gizoid had previously absorbed any Chaos Emeralds, even though it is capable of doing so. It's hard to nail down exactly how strong Emerald with all 7 Chaos Emeralds is, but he's at least as strong as something like Perfect Chaos and probably Gaia, who you could have argued that Base Sonic was only able to beat Perfect Chaos with hacks before, and he was only able to beat Gaia with all 7 Chaos Emeralds, but Sonic is facing Emerald head on here. Sonic is just stronger and more durable than Emerald is, meaning that Sonic should at least scale to like large city level at the lowest if you want to argue that Emerald is only as strong as Perfect Chaos and no stronger, and you also want to lowball how strong Perfect Chaos is. Hey, Editing Pumpkin here. I just wanted to cut in to say a few things real quick. One thing I didn't think I made clear enough in the initial version of this video is that I think this is a massive lowball of Emerald's power. I think at the very least you need to give Emerald like planet level, given that he has absorbed all 7 Chaos Emeralds. While we don't have definitive proof that Emerald is planet level, I think it's pretty unreasonable to scale him below that. Also, I did want to say that there are some feats that can scale base Sonic way above this based on some opponents that he's beaten. A good example is Eraser Jin from Secret Rings, who is said to have destroyed multiple stories within the Arabian Nights, which are basically like pocket dimensions in that game. If you assume that this is destroying multiple dimensions and or universes, and that Eraser Jin did this as a feat of strength, Sonic going toe-to-toe to him in a boss fight while he wasn't able to beat him until he became Dark-Spine Sonic, the fact that he held his ground at all does just put Sonic at like multiversal. Personally, I think there are too many asterisks here to use this feat to actually scale Sonic at multiversal. Eraser Jin may have been using magic and not a feat of strength to do this, and maybe that magic isn't applicable in a one-on-one fight, so that's why Sonic was able to beat him. There's also the fact that the Storybook games are some of the most poetic games in the entire series, so this may have just been a metaphor of some kind, we're not really sure. Still, if you buy this feat directly, then Sonic is like multiversal or at least universal. Anyway, just back to the video. Now, I think this is a really important feat for Sonic because it's both very straightforward and plot relevant. Emerald is the basis for Gimmerl, a character who shows up in IDW canon, and he appears in Dark Beginnings. Emerald is unambiguously canon, and this fight with Sonic is the climax of Sonic Battle's story. It's also a pretty straightforward fight with someone confirmed in the game to be extremely powerful, making it about as straightforward as any scaling of this type can be. It's also not some vague weirdness like Sonic escaping null space with a speed that kind of feels made up. It's just a straight up brawl. Sonic needs to be at least this strong in canon in his base form, otherwise this is a pretty big plot hole. This comfortably places base Sonic as much more powerful than I think most people would imagine him to be. Now, I would like to briefly mention Super Sonic here. We're not going to spend too much time scaling it because it's not directly relevant to Surge, which is what started this whole thing, but Super Sonic is like blatantly multiversal. We don't have any direct feats for them, but Super Sonic killed both Solaris and the End, which are portrayed as gods of destruction capable of destroying basically all life, not only in this universe, but in all possible universes. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that's very open to interpretation. Whether or not Solaris was fully formed is actually that big of a threat yet, or whether the End is actually telling the truth when it says how strong it is, or if it's just bullshitting us, or things that are left open to the viewer to decide. You have a very hard time arguing as anyone who's into power scaling that Super Sonic is anywhere below cosmic levels of power though. Unfortunately, that's not really relevant to our discussion right now. Super Sonic doesn't really have any direct bearing on Sonic's power level because we don't know if it's a numerical power-up like something like Super Saiyan is in Dragon Ball. In fact, the way the two franchises treat these super forms makes them feel like that type of comparison is just not warranted at all. Whereas the Super Saiyans end up becoming a sort of standard power-up that a lot of Saiyans can do in lore, Super Sonic and the super forms in Sonic the Hedgehog have stayed very mythical in their power level. They're way above the power of literally anything else we've seen in the entire franchise. If you want my interpretation of it, I think entering a super form gives you access to all the energy of the Chaos Emeralds, which has been stated to essentially be unlimited, and it's kind of just up to you how well you can handle that level of energy. Sonic's super form getting stronger over time is best explained not only as him getting stronger, but also him getting better at actually using his super form and being able to use the energy the Chaos Emeralds give him more effectively. So yeah, Super Sonic is interesting from a power scaling perspective, but it's not something I want to talk about too much right now because it's just not that relevant. Now, with all of that said, we can finally go back to Surge. Surge is, as previously stated, at least around as strong as Sonic. She's definitively weaker, but capable of keeping up with base Sonic in a fight, so she has to at least scale to around base Sonic's lowest stats. This places her at, in my mind, probably around speed of light at the lowest, and probably around planet level in terms of attack potency and endurance. And this is the same character who was defeated by tripping on some bolts, having a bucket put on her head, and probably worst of all, having her electricity sucked out by household appliances. There's kind of some dissonance here between what Surge should be able to do based on scaling her to these feats and what we actually see her capable of. More and more inconsistencies pop up the more you look for them. In issue 10 of IDW, Shadow knocks Neo Metal out of his super form with a single Chaos Spear, which is like insane. Neo Metal is, in his base form, capable of at least standing toe-to-toe with base Sonic, and we have no reason to believe his super form isn't at least a similar power boost. This sort of implies that Shadow could somehow knock Super Sonic out of Super, which is just wrong. That's just wrong. That makes no sense. If you tried to scale this would comfortably put base Shadow far above base Sonic, which is not the feeling you get from most of their interactions. This is a smaller one, but Amy is shown leaving massive craters with her hammer swing, but can't open this door in issue 75 of the comic. However, Rough, Tumble, and Vector are able to push it open, and I guess that's three people who we know are super strong compared to just Amy and Vector, but I don't know, I feel like Amy should maybe just be able to do it with just her and Vector. Also, in this same issue, Sonic fights Clutch, this old mob boss character, and Clutch is shown kind of keeping up with Sonic, which means Clutch is at least approaching the speed of light, apparently, which is insane. Okay, I know Sonic is holding back here, but like, not getting completely overwhelmed by Sonic implies a level of speed that Clutch just should not have. No matter how much you want to downplay Sonic, he should just be no diffing Clutch here. The more you read the IDW comics and play the games, the more you get the feeling that the writers just don't care to keep any of this stuff consistent. And you'd be right. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it is probably the case that when they're writing these games and comics, these kinds of inconsistencies and problems are the last thing on the writers' minds. Telling a story is already hard enough when you're not trying to remain consistent with over 3 decades of lore and random feats. This kind of analysis isn't really the point of most stories, and it's worth keeping that in mind when you're reading a comic or watching a show. And this is all made a lot worse by the fact that there are a ton of different people working on each of these projects. Sonic games have had a ton of different writers and even tones over the years. This would obviously lead to a lot of contradictions, but that's not really a unique insight, is it? I mean, The Simpsons was making jokes about nerds nitpicking continuity errors before I was even born. I think there's a lot more that can be said about not only why these kinds of contradictions happen, but why things have gotten so out of hand with Sonic specifically. I think a major contributing factor is the fact that there are a series of conflicting incentives when it comes to writing Sonic. First is the incentive from the video games and also the comics to an extent to just make the characters do cool shit. I mean, you've seen the reactions to the Titan fights in Frontiers, right? Sonic games have always been big on spectacle, and the larger the enemy Sonic fights, the cooler the effects, and the more shit that gets blown up, the more spectacle there is. This creates an obvious incentive in the games to try and push Sonic's power level upwards to give the audience bigger and cooler final bosses. However, there are some incentives in the writing department to make Sonic a more powerful character outside of just having things look cool. For one, it also allows you to touch on some themes that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. I mean, look at the end. The end is a literal version of the abstract concept of death. By having Super Sonic defeat the end, you automatically make a very simple and poignant statement about life. Sonic and his ideology, the power of friendship and never giving up, is literally more powerful than death itself. This applies to every cosmic deity Sonic defeats, and while you can make these sorts of statements without taking things to this level, putting your character's power level at this cosmic scale makes it a lot easier because you don't have to already establish what the villain represents through some more complex symbolism. The meaning is just immediately obvious. There's also an element where this kind of power level becomes inevitable with a character like Sonic. Sonic never loses, at least not completely. Every story eventually ends with him being the bad guy, usually through force. This establishes whatever Sonic has beaten as something he's able to handle, so the next threat has to be bigger and better to give him a challenge, and when Sonic beats that, he's now established to be even more powerful. It's a form of power creep in storytelling that can be really hard to write around. This is really obvious in unbroken, long-running narratives built around fighting, the most famous example being Dragon Ball. Anyway, some crazy stuff happens in original Dragon Ball, like Roshi blowing up the moon, but at this point that's kinda small potatoes in comparison to the number of characters who can easily destroy entire planets in that universe. Again, Sonic's been around for 3 decades, he's been power crept a lot at this point. All of these circumstances pushed Sonic's power level up and up, but there are just as many considerations that pull Sonic's power level downwards. Reasons why some of the staff may not want Sonic to be massively faster than light or a galaxy buster or whatever. One consideration is the actual gameplay of Sonic games. While Sonic is known for going fast, most people actually can't react to things at the speed of light, as it turns out. Sonic games have a bit of an issue where they need to make the player feel like they're going around at the speed of sound while not actually being anywhere near that fast in reality. If you want to sell a speed without actually portraying it, that's a lot easier to do with smaller top speeds. Keeping Sonic at around the speed of sound makes convincing people that the gameplay matches that number a lot easier than the insane speed feats that Sonic is technically capable of. This is probably why the Unleashed feat felt so weird. The Lightspeed Dash feels like it's going light speed, but it can't realistically in-game because it can be launched into from very low speed. It would be way too jarring. Also because portraying actual speed of light travel is basically impossible. However, in other contexts, they can allow Sonic to go faster, and they do need to keep the in-game speedometer consistent, so we end up with the 9 times speed of light Sonic. Outside of gameplay, there are a lot of writing reasons to push Sonic's power level down. For one, it makes fights a lot more relatable. Sure, seeing an entire planet blow up is super cool, but you can only see that so many times before it gets kind of boring. However, there are tons of possibilities for combat strategy in day-to-day life. The fight with Surge is a great example. We can all relate to tripping on small rolling objects on the floor, and Tails' strategy of draining Surge of all of her electricity is really clever given her power set. If Sonic and his enemies are weaker, the writers have more room to write all different kinds of combat scenarios. The freedom a lower power level gives you is even wider than that though. It also allows you to tell a lot of different kinds of stories. The entire premise of the Phantom Rider arc kind of rests on the idea that Sonic isn't fast enough to have a speedster scene where he runs around as if time is stopped and investigates clean sweep. Honestly, if Sonic is as fast as everyone online says he is, there would be no conflict in the Sonic universe at all. Sonic could just run around and stop all trouble before it even happens. Eggman couldn't even stop him with any of his schemes. There's nothing he could do to keep up with that level of speed. This is the inherent problem with making a character too strong, the end result of the Dragon Ball power creep problem. You end up with a main character so powerful that there's almost nothing that could realistically challenge them. This also ends up limiting what kinds of characters you could introduce into the series. After all, how are we supposed to get invested in new heroes or villains if they're all so much weaker than the main crew that they would never realistically be plot relevant? Now, obviously that's a bit reductive. People care about characters for lots of reasons outside of them doing things directly relevant to the plot, but it can be really difficult to tell stories in an action series if half of your cast is on par with gods and the others are literally just some chick with a cool gun. A lot of this weirdness comes up with the new IDW characters. Tangle and Whisper are characters who are remarkably strong by the standards of the universe overall, but pale in comparison to the main cast. In order to keep them relevant, the comic not only has to make the main cast less powerful than some material implies they could be, but also has to have introduced new villains like Mimic into the cast for them to fight against. As you can see, there are a lot of reasons why you would want to push a character's strength up or down. It seems like the writers and developers have recognized this too, and have chosen a deliberate strategy of vagueness to keep the games and comics as interesting as possible. This is probably why we never get direct statements about how fast Sonic is or anything like that. As soon as we have a measurable, knowable number, we can start to compare it to things we see in the game and start to see the cracks. Maintaining the suspension of disbelief is a lot more important than giving us raw numbers, so this approach to the problem is kind of a no-brainer, and I don't mind it. Obviously from this video I'm a huge fucking nerd who enjoys this power scaling stuff, but I don't need to know exactly what Sonic's top speed is to enjoy the games or the comics. I like Sonic being able to have stories where he defeats gods of death and also stories where he does a Kamen Rider reference. There is one more problem that exacerbates this entire discussion, though it is a little bit off topic, and that's some of the issues with power scaling in general. Again, considering how long I've spent talking about this topic, it's clear that I do like power scaling as a hobby, but there are some trends in it that I find a bit problematic. The most dramatic when it comes to Sonic discussions is the tendency to inflate the power levels of characters. This is something that I see basically across the board, by the way. This is not targeted at any one specific community. All over the place, when there are multiple valid interpretations of a feat or statement relevant to power scaling, I see the most common interpretation that wins out being whichever one makes the character strongest. Things like Sonic outrunning the black hole or the speed feats of Sonic escaping null space or restoring white space are good examples of this. On one hand, you could interpret this as making Sonic's speed massively faster than light or completely incalculable, but that creates a lot of plot holes where Sonic gets hit by shit that he realistically shouldn't. On the other hand, you could just say these are weird outliers or something like that, but neither interpretation is really supported by the material. Whenever I see something like this happen in a power scaling community, what seems to become consensus is just whatever the highest number you can get out of the feat is. I think this starts to bleed into a little bit of the bias issue. Everyone wants their favorite character to be as strong as possible and to win as many versus matchups as possible. And even if you try to push down on that and to be as objective as possible, people are not objective creatures. People are going to at least trend towards the interpretations that they like best for whatever reason. And if you're into power scaling, that interpretation is likely to be the one that makes your favorite character stronger. Again, that's not to say that that interpretation is invalid. If it was invalid, I would just say they're wrong. I'm saying it's an interpretation because it is a valid way of reading the work. The end result of this bias is to scale every character as high as calculably possible with their feats. And while that is at least consistent across the board, that's not really how writing works, or what I think the intended effect of most of this material is. Surge is a really bad example of this. As much as I love Surge and want her to be a really powerful badass, she's one of my favorite characters in IDW, she's not multiversal. As I did research into this to try to understand where they got that number from, the only conclusion I could come to is that they scaled Dynamo Cage Surge to a lot of supersonic feats, which just is not supported by the material at all. Basically, all of Sonic's cosmic level feats, the ones that are like universal, multiversal level, they're all from his super forms, which he is not in when he fights Surge literally ever. I should probably redo that take, but I don't want to. I'm gonna leave the notification in. That's another issue with power scaling, which is that unfortunately, the community is rife with people who are just not good at reading. This isn't a problem unique to power scaling. Basically, every community is going to be known outside of the community for its worst elements. I mean, I'm a fucking Sonic fan. I can't talk that much shit. Don't mess with us Sonic fans. We don't even like Sonic. And this is getting a bit rambly now, so I'm probably just gonna end the video here. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really love this video, consider becoming a member to get access to my videos early and to get your name read out at the end of my videos. I only have one member right now, so shout out to Elric111. Anyway, that's all for now. See you guys next time.